Hello and welcome to By the Book. I'm your host, Joe Hebert, and we're continuing our course in truth, justice, and leadership with the study of Tocqueville's Democracy in America. As we saw earlier, Tocqueville is a French statesman who visited the United States in 1831, and he wrote a very famous book, Democracy in America. We're going through just some selections from that. And if we back up a little bit to Machiavelli, in our section on Machiavelli, we saw that Machiavelli recommends founding on the people. And by that, he means, he characterizes the people as being selfish in a decent way. That is, they want to be left alone and they want material prosperity and things of that nature. And if the government or the prince provides that, then the government or the prince can then consolidate power and do anything necessary to have power, and the people will be okay with that. So as we look at Tocqueville's, and he's studying American democracy, remember, he's trying to look at democracy at its best, but he's also trying to be an honest friend of democracy. And so he's generally supportive of it, but he's willing to call attention to flaws that could be remedied to some extent. And so as we go through this, the pattern that we're seeing is that Tocqueville thinks that a lot of these Machiavellian tendencies of thought and behavior are true enough to human nature that, yes, he does observe them in America, that a democratic society has many of the features that Machiavelli is predicting or that Machiavelli is formulating in The Prince. But with this major proviso that, according to Tocqueville, this does not actually satisfy our desires because it's not true to human nature. It's only part of our nature. It's not the whole of our nature. We're not actually satisfied with just these material things and outward success the way that Machiavelli had said. We're not decent in the Machiavellian sense. There's something more to us in our human nature. And so while Tocqueville remains supportive and sympathetic, he's not trying to overthrow this whole democratic project, throw it out or anything like that. But he is gently and sometimes, pretty firmly insisting that we think about the limitations and that we think about the costs that we're paying for certain assumptions or habits that we have. And he's trying to lead us into a self-knowledge, self-criticism that could lead to a higher and truer kind of happiness. So today we're going to look at a couple of chapters of Tocqueville that have to do with what he calls self-interest, well understood. In different translations, this comes out a little bit differently: interest or self-interest, well understood or rightly understood. But the bottom line is that Tocqueville is going to look at a notion which is really crucial. Machiavelli says that everybody is selfish in the sense that they want to satisfy their own desires. They don't care about what is actually good per se. In fact, he says that's really an imaginary concept. There's no such thing as what's actually good. There's only desires that I have which are satisfied or not. And that's really what everything comes down to. So in this sense, we could talk about self-interest in a Machiavellian sense is basically just satisfaction of desires that are intrinsically just my own. They really have no reference to other people unless other people happen to serve my desires in some way. But the concept of interest, what is beneficial to us? We don't necessarily have to see this in a Machiavellian sense. In other words, what's good for me might actually be, as Tocqueville was saying before, to know the truth, for example. If I have a desire for the truth, then I want the truth for the sake of the truth. I don't want it so I can get money out of it or I can get power out of it. I want it because I want to know the truth. So we've already seen that for Tocqueville, there's such a thing as a disinterested desire. And so the term interest becomes very, like selfish, it becomes very paradoxical because in a sense, we have an interest in something that goes beyond our own interests. In other words, I love the sunset, not just because it's somehow benefiting me, but because it's just beautiful. The categories, the classical categories that would fit into this are the true, the good, and the beautiful. that we desire something because it's true, because it's good, because it's beautiful. And in a sense, we have an interest in it, but the interest is not anything particular to ourselves. The interest is simply in the truth, the goodness, or the beauty of this thing. So believing that, Tocqueville is going to have a more complex picture of self-interest or interest. What is it that actually drives us to do what we do? What actually satisfies us as human beings? And in these 2 chapters, he's going to say some really important things about that. Now, as usual, Tocqueville is going to put things in an historical context and in a political context. So in a different political regime and different time periods, we have some different tendencies of how people think about their interest or self-interest. So here we're going to look at, as he often does, at the aristocratic times. When the world was led by a small number of powerful and rich individuals, he's talking about the aristocracies of old, the latter loved to form a sublime idea of the duties of man. We've seen this before. Sublime is the high, something that is so high and beautiful that it's beyond the individual. Right? It's beyond the individual and his individual interest. So in an aristocratic centuries, just like they love the truth for the sake of the truth, they love the sublime for the sake of the sublime. They took pleasure in professing that it is glorious to forget self and that it is right to do good without interest, just like God. So you see the paradox here is that, I actually achieve greater happiness when I forget myself. And the model for this ultimately is God himself. Okay, God didn't have to create the world. He didn't need anything. He created the world out of sheer goodness because he wanted to share his goodness with others who wouldn't exist if he didn't create them. So this, that's a high model, right? That my life should all, be about not magnifying myself, but doing what's good because it's good. However, paradoxically, that magnifies me, right? That makes me happy. It makes me fulfilled. That was the official doctrine of this time in the matter of morality. I doubt that men were more virtuous in aristocratic centuries than in others, but it is certain that they then talked constantly about the beauties of virtue. They only studied in secret how it was useful. So it's very similar to what we saw with the sciences, that Tocqueville is saying that they perhaps went a little bit too far in only looking at the disinterested side of human action. They maybe didn't go enough into how important it is to pursue some of our interests. But you notice, and this is going to come up over and over again, that even though he somewhat relativizes this to the time period, so this is not a statement of the truth of things. This is a statement of how aristocrats look at it, but it overlaps, it intersects with what he thinks the truth is, right? He does believe in the sublime. He does believe that there's this higher good. He just thinks that a couple things, the aristocrats can exaggerate it in terms of pretending like they don't care about self-interest when they actually do, and that they don't perfectly adhere to their own beliefs because it's human nature is not that good, right? It's not that pure. But it doesn't mean that Tocqueville doesn't believe that there's any truth to this. In fact, we've already seen he does believe there's such a thing as a pure desire to know, and we're going to see that here. He's going to teach us that there is, in fact, a part of human nature that does long to do good for the sake of doing good. So what happens in democratic times? He says, as the imagination soars less and as each person concentrates on himself, as we said before, this is just a necessary consequence of democratic life because we're born not knowing what our future is going to be. So we have to focus on ourselves. Moralists become afraid of this idea of sacrifice, and they no longer dare to offer it to the human mind. So they are reduced to trying to find out if the individual advantage of citizens would not be to work toward the happiness of all. And when they have discovered one of these points, where particular interest meets with general interest and merges with it, they hasten to bring it to light little by little. Little by little, similar observations multiply. What was only an isolated remark becomes a general doctrine, and you believe finally that you see that man, by serving his fellows, serves himself, and that his particular interest is to do good. So there's a lot packed into this, but the key point here is Tocqueville's talking about moralists. He's talking about people who are trying to promote public morality in modern times. This is one of the categories into which he puts himself. Like we mentioned earlier, he calls himself a political scientist, or at least he's developing a political science in this book. And he clearly identifies himself as a moralist in this and several other passages in the book. So he has a goal to promote morality, but he says that people trying to promote morality in modern times run into the problem that if you talk about the sublime and the beautiful and the true and the good, people are going to have a sort of Machiavellian response to that and say, oh, that's nice, but it kind of sounds imaginary, romantic, whatever. It's not practical. I got to think practically. So the way that we're going to package morality in modern times is going to be do good for your own benefit. When you do good, you're going to get rewarded for that one way or the other. And there's various ways that you could account for that. But this is going to be the mode of thinking. And this, note, this is the best mode of thinking in modern times, because the alternative, as he points out, and which he sees a lot in France, is people are just going to be purely selfish and say, I don't care what's good for other people. I'm just going to do what's good for me. And he's saying, well, the healthiest version of this modern focus on self-interest, what he's calling interest well understood, is to realize that my best interest in the long run is to help other people and help to foster an environment in which I will also be helped by other people. So in the first part of this quotation, he's talking about how in Europe, it tends to be not so great, that people are focused on just the individual self-interest. Whereas in America, he says they've got this down pretty well. One of the people he does not mention particularly, but I just got to mention Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, with his Farmer's Almanac and with his autobiography, he was probably the most significant figure who was, in fact, advancing this exact idea that you benefit yourself by benefiting others. And this was in this sense, it was a quintessential early American philosophy, one of the first, distinctively American philosophies that was being promulgated. And Tocqueville observes this in the 1830s, that Americans take pleasure in explaining almost all the actions of their life with the aid of interest well understood. They show with satisfaction how enlightened love of themselves leads them constantly to help each other and disposes them willingly to sacrifice for the good of the state a portion of their time and their wealth. It's a very significant point in his book because, among other things, he argues democracy is not going to work if people are passive, and people are going to have to sacrifice time and energy to be active citizens, and they could be doing other stuff. They could be making money. They could be having fun. Why are they going to make that sacrifice? Without interest well understood, without the idea that by benefiting society, they're going to benefit themselves, they wouldn't be doing that. So it's important in many, many different ways, and including some of the most basic political messages in the book. But what does Tocqueville say about it? You can see that he favors it to an extent because it's much better than what he sees in Europe, and it has great practical benefits. But nonetheless, he is going to call it into question. So let's look at this carefully. I think that in doing this, explaining their good deeds by saying, "Oh, it's only for my own interest anyway," in doing this, they often do not do themselves justice. That could be a casual expression, but it's not a casual expression for Tocqueville. They're not doing themselves justice. That is a very weighty statement. So there's something actually wrong with this. They're actually denigrating themselves. They are not being true to themselves when they say this. Why is it? For you sometimes see in the United States, as elsewhere, citizens give themselves to the disinterested and unconsidered impulses that are natural to man. So this is one of those places, which we're going to see several, where Tocqueville makes it abundantly clear his view of human nature is more complex than the Machiavellian view. We are not simply selfish by nature. In fact, disinterested passions, or sparks, impulses, as he puts it here, disinterested impulses and passions are natural to man. They're part of our nature. But the Americans hardly ever admit that they yield to movements of this type. They prefer to honor their philosophy rather than themselves. And notice the double, the paradoxical, the double meaning of that is that not only are they doing good because they want to do good, but then they're not admitting it. They're saying, "Oh, it's just in my own interest." But in doing this, they're actually honoring their philosophy rather than themselves. So it's a doubly disinterested act, not only helping somebody who's disinterested, but then crediting their philosophy rather than, their own character for it, is a kind of public spiritedness. I'm going to be a good American, and I'm going to explain my actions based on interest well understood, as Tocqueville is putting it. So it's not just about the Americans. Again, he says this is human nature. Human nature is bigger and better than what this doctrine implies. But in modern times, this is what people are going to tend to believe. So Tocqueville, finally, what we're going to look at in this chapter, Tocqueville says he wants to judge this thing, okay? And we've already seen implicitly his judgment, but what is his official judgment going to be? I will not be afraid to say that the doctrine of interest well understood seems to me of all philosophical theories the most appropriate to the needs of the men of our time, and that I see in it the most powerful guarantee remaining to them against themselves. So it is principally toward this doctrine that the mind of the moralists of today should turn. Even if they were to judge it as imperfect, it would still have to be adopted as necessary. So what is Tocqueville doing here? First of all, he's officially endorsing this and saying in modern times, if you go around blasting about true good and the beautiful, you're going to get a small audience. I'm afraid that doesn't bode well for this blog, but such, so be it. But you're not going to have the same mass appeal with that kind of talk. So if you're actually trying to get large numbers of people to do the right thing, you're going to have to use interest well understood. That will work much better. However, the way he's communicating this to us, even if you were to judge it imperfect, and just a moment ago he said it's injustice, it's unjust to actually explain things that way. It's not true to human nature. It's not true to the people who are doing good because of disinterested impulses. So he does not, and he also says, we skipped over, but he says that it's not virtuous per se to do things for interest well understood, but it can habituate us towards virtue. So what he's implying is that true virtue would be doing good because it's good, and doing it because I want some benefit from it is not true virtue, but it could be a start. It could get me on the path. Eventually, as I'm doing these good things, I realize, oh, it's actually good to do these things. I actually want to do it because it's good. So it can lead to virtue, but it's not in itself, it falls short of virtue. So what this means is, again, it's very characteristic of Tocqueville. He is sympathetic and supportive towards what's happening and trying to make the best out of modern democracy. But at the same time, he wants us to know the limitations of it, the inaccuracies of it, and he wants to tell us this. So anybody who's reading this, or anybody who is hearing from somebody who has read this, can think beyond. They can think outside the box of these categories that are going to predominate in modern times. He's trying to liberate us. So we don't have to be stuck in what Plato called the cave. We don't have to be stuck in the cave of modern thought. We could be living in modern times. We could be, reasonably in harmony with the good parts of modern society, but at the same time we can have the self-knowledge to think beyond the limiting categories and the limiting assumptions that may prevail in those times. So there's another chapter on interest well understood, and this chapter is about how Americans apply it in matters of religion. And before we dive into this, I just want to briefly say that Tocqueville's position on religion, first of all, his personal history of religion, he grew up Catholic, had a very good Catholic education. I think he was well versed in Catholic theology up to probably when he was a young adult, basically. He did fall away from the Catholic faith in his early 20s. It was from the study of various philosophical books that he sort of questioned some of the teachings of the church. On his deathbed, he did reconvert, but through most of his life, he was living as a non-believer, although somebody who was very sympathetic towards Christianity and Catholicism in particular. And so you're going to see this in the way that he talks about religion in this book. He's very sympathetic and supportive. He's not speaking as a believer, but he's speaking as somebody who understands it pretty well and has a certain admiration for what's going on in religion. So just to begin with, he makes it clear why the religious element of interest well understood is really important. He says, if the doctrine of interest well understood had only this world in view, it would be far from enough. Why is that? Because he says a great number of sacrifices can find their reward only in the other life. And whatever intellectual effort you make to feel the usefulness of virtue, it will always be difficult to make a man live well who does not want to die. So for one thing, the sacrifices that we may have to make could include our lives. So there's various circumstances where doing the right thing is going to be risky. And so if we want people consistently, doing good and doing what's right, it means that, people are going to have courage. People are going to have to risk their lives and make other significant sacrifices and risks. Okay, and he said trying to justify that without reference to an afterlife is pretty difficult. And for this reason alone, interest well understood is not going to work too well without some religious component. So luckily, in a sense, right, the logic of the philosophical logic and the theological logic can go together pretty well. The philosophers who teach this doctrine say to men that to be happy in life, you must watch over your passions and carefully repress their excesses, that you cannot gain lasting happiness except by denying yourself 1,000 passing enjoyments, and that finally you must triumph over yourself constantly in order to serve yourself better. So the philosophical notion of interest well understood is you have to govern yourself. You have to regulate yourself, because going after everything you want when you want it will make you unhappy in the long run. Just like gorging yourself on junk food is not going to make you healthy. Doing whatever you want at any moment is not going to make you happy. So flip side, you have to regulate, you have to sacrifice some of those desires for a greater happiness. Now, the founders of nearly all religions adhered more or less to the same language. Without pointing out another path to men, they only placed the goal further away. Instead of placing in this world the prize for the sacrifices that they impose, they put it in the other. So religion can be, and he says, almost all religions include this component of simply an extension of our earthly interests into the next life. So just like in this life, it pays for me to be well-regulated and self-disciplined, it will pay off in the next life as well. Now, is that all there is to religion? No, and here's the maneuver that we've seen Tocqueville do over and over again, where he says there's more. This is fine, this is okay, but there's much more to this in life. And here he does this in relation to religion. He says, I refuse to believe that all those who practice virtue because of the spirit of religion act only with a reward in view. So, just like he had said that self-interest is not all there is to human nature, there's disinterestedness. And remember, he had connected it to God. He said in the aristocratic centuries, they say they want to be like God, being disinterested. Okay, and he comes back to that here. He says, I have met zealous Christians who constantly forget themselves in order to work with more fervor for the happiness of all. and I have heard them claim that they acted this way only to merit the good things of the other world. So you notice how for Tocqueville, it doesn't particularly matter if we're trying to get benefits in this life or benefits in the next life. That's still fundamentally the same motive. I want a reward for what I'm doing. And that's interest well understood. There's a certain degree of selfishness there. And so the higher good, the higher virtue transcends that, even with regard to religion. And here's how he explains that. I cannot prevent myself from thinking that they are deluding themselves. I respect them too much to believe them. So in other words, this is a very important point. There's something that is much greater in religion, just like there's something that's much greater in philosophy. And what is that? Here, I think it's one of the most important passages in the book, because he is outlining probably the most sublime and beautiful formulation of what the highest goal of human life is, even though he himself did not quite embrace this. But he certainly appreciated it, as you can see from this passage. This is a beautiful expression of Christian charity, the virtue of charity, which is the highest virtue in Christian theology. He says, Christianity tells us it is true that you must prefer others to self in order to gain heaven. But is heaven just a reward like any other reward? Is it just like having a nice house or, having a peaceful life on earth? No, there's something much more to what is meant by heaven in Christian theology. Christianity also tells us that you must do good to your fellows out of love of God. That's charity. That is a magnificent expression. So magnificence here, kind of like sublimity. Man penetrates divine thought with his intelligence. He sees that the purpose of God is order. He associates freely with this great design. And even while sacrificing his particular interests to this admirable order of all things, he expects no other recompense than the pleasure of contemplating it. So remember the section on science where he had said the sublime view of science is that science is just to contemplate the truth. We want to know the truth so we can contemplate it. Just like we want to see the sunset so we can just be in awe of the sunset. We're not trying to do something with it. We're not trying to put it in our pocket, use it for something else. We're just trying to soak in the magnificence. And this, for Tocqueville, this is how he understands correctly, I think, the highest virtue of Christianity. The highest motive that we have as human beings is we want to see the face of God. We want to actually be able to, as he puts it here, to grasp the admirable order of all things. We want to see the big picture. And this, by the way, is also a perfect expression of Socratic philosophy. It's one of the things where Socratic philosophy and Christian theology dovetail very, very tightly, because as we'll see when we look at Socrates, for Socrates, the ultimate desire of human beings is for cosmos. The word in Greek is cosmos, and that means order. That's what Tocqueville calls the admirable order of all things. The fact that this is the order of things, this is the truth, this is the way things are, that is the thing that we desire the most. We want to know the way things are, and we want to be in harmony with that. And so for Socrates, he said that he didn't know about God, from Scripture. He didn't know about God through religion, really, because the religions of his time were quite different. He just is kind of projecting that there's got to be some kind of divine mind, some kind of divine intellect that is behind this order of things. And that's what we desire as human beings, is to grasp that. What is that divine order that explains the meaning of things? And so this is the ultimate motive for Tocqueville, too. Even though he himself lacks faith, but he still sees this is what human nature really longs for. It longs to know the order of things. And if you, through faith, if you can get a glimpse of that order of things, that's the highest motive that you have for making all these sacrifices that you make and for doing all these good deeds, is not because of, you're going to experience certain pleasures in heaven, certain external pleasures or benefits. It is simply because you want to see the face of God. You want to know the order of things, and you're doing everything possible to know it and to conform to it. So now we come back down to earth, and as usual, Tocqueville is ultimately going to be very practical and supportive of the modern paradigm, even though he's trying to get us to question it in our own minds and our own souls. So he says, I do not believe that the sole motivating force of religious men is interest, but I think that interest is the principal means that religions themselves use to lead men, and I do not doubt that it is from this side that they take hold of the crowd and become popular. So just like with interest well understood in general, it's the best thing overall for promoting morality. It's the best thing for promoting religion, and it's very important to promote religion. But it isn't actually the highest motive or the highest goal, and he wants us to know that. Tocqueville will come back to religion again. We're first going to see his critique of materialism, and then we're going to come back to some more significant statements that he makes about the practice of religion in America and how this contributes to the overall chances of happiness and flourishing in society. But from this, we can see that, again, the general formula that Tocqueville has is to kind of accept the practical realities of modern society, look for the best formulation of those things that is in the general interest, but also to call attention to the philosophical limitations and to try to encourage us to think beyond them.